education, public safety, healthcare, government, business. These and other important issues affecting our local community are identified and discussed with local and civic leaders here on Community Impact. Now with today's guest, here's our host, Jay Trelease.
Welcome to Community Impact. My guest, her name is Jeanne Buesser. Jeanne is the president and the founder of the Apraxia network of Bergen County. She has a compelling personal story, and she is doing some really fantastic work through her organization. Jeanne.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for being here. Apraxia, what is it exactly?
It's a severe neurological speech disorder. Basically what it is there's weak linkage in the brain. So the infant to child has the problem of producing the beginning sounds of speech. They know exactly what they want to say, but they have a problem saying it, articulating it. So in other words, the child might know the word or see the word cookie, point to it, but could not say the k word or the k sound to begin to build the building blocks of cookie. So that's one of the frustrations of the children, because they're not able to enunciate, they're not able to babble when they're infants. They don't coo. They have low muscle tone in their face and their body and their cheeks and things like that. They have problems eating because of the sensory input. They also have problems because of the weaknesses in their tongue. So all these areas have to be strengthened from not only speech therapy, but also occupational therapy. Another thing of the low muscle tone is called hypotonia. And hypotonia means low muscle tone. To give you some example, it's like lifting a sack of potatoes. When you lift a sack of potatoes, they're really heavy and they're dense. That's what a child feels like. They're not necessarily like a rag doll, but their low muscle tone is not necessarily strong. You also have, with hypotonia, you also have a child would have a bounce in their step because they don't have a firm step from the heel to the toe. So you'd also have a spring in their step. They walk on their toes.
Okay.
So just to give you some idea, that's also...
This sounds like autism. Is apraxia a manifestation of autism, or is it something that you could also have along with being autistic? Explain that for us.
Yes, you can. You can have some of the symptoms of a child with apraxia, not only the low muscle tone. You might have sensory issues with the light, touch, as far as being sensitive to touch, being sensitive to textures, eating issues. Because your low muscle tone in your mouth, you have a problem with chewing. Your tongue doesn't know which way to go, to the right or to the left, licking things from your mouth. Because your low muscle tone is there, the child sometimes can not so much choke, but they don't know how to chew little pieces, and swallowing can be issues. Sometimes people have problems eating because they either take too big bites, as far as infants, and they don't. As far as toddlers, it's a hard time going to the textures, different textures, crunchy or things of that nature, because of the tongue having the low muscle tone. They have a hard time directing.
Now tell us a little bit about your own personal experience with apraxia, because it is extremely personal. Your son was diagnosed with it many years ago, and that's obviously how you began this organization.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, when my son was diagnosed, it was about a little less than 2 years old. And we went to a developmental pediatrician who gave us the diagnosis. And from there, I was able to, little by little, get some resources about how to get him extra therapies, speech therapies, and occupational therapies, because he had low muscle tone, and how to get that strengthened so he could sit up properly and eventually crawl and walk and catch balls. He didn't have a problem with the gross motor. It was more of the fine motor. So you also had a problem of gripping pencils and things like that. He would grow it in a fist, not so much like a regular finger point, having the pencil between the index finger and the thumb, but he would have it as a grip for in a fist. So you would have to, and also when it comes to writing, he would write in a sense with a whole fist instead of just the two fingers, grabbing a pencil eventually. You also have a problem of when you have apraxia because of the low muscle tone and the weak links in the brain, you have a problem as well as you get older of articulation, of being able to be understood. A lot of times you'll have, not so much from birth when you have no sounds and garbles or cooing, but as you get older, the articulation of the sounds is very hard to be understood because of the movements in your mouth and things like that, having low muscle tone.
And one of the symptoms is, as an infant, there isn't the baby gurgling or the
Correct.
baby noises.
Correct.
So your son was silent?
Practically, yes.
He cried?
He cried, but
Yeah.
crying for hunger or crying because you're scared is different than the actual speaking. They're two parts of the brain. They're completely different. So therefore, when you have a child who has a delay, if you want to call it that, and they are not they know what they want to say, even as infants. They'll point to things and things like that. So it's just a question of they're not able to produce the sounds to say the word. And because of the weak linkage in the brain, as the child progresses, you might hear the word cookie or bottle or cup, and you're like, wow, this is fantastic. And in the next minute, the weak links of the brain are not connecting properly, and you won't hear that word again. So it's not that you won't ever hear it again, but it's not like you can bring it up like a spontaneous conversation where you can say ball and say ball and say ball again. Not necessarily. So as the child progresses with intensive speech therapy and occupational therapy, they learn from the blends, the word blends. Example, L's or W's, which my son had a real time hard with P's. Very hard time. And so a lot of the words or things he approximately tried to say didn't have those sounds in them. And he had to learn how to produce them, because when you're young, if you've never had the vocabulary when you're younger, you don't know what the sounds like. So it's how you hear things, how you process them in the brain, and how you produce the sounds.
How was your son diagnosed? What was the set of circumstances that led to his diagnosis?
Well, as I said, he was not talking at all. He was not cooing, babbling, had low muscle tone, didn't drool, where you can have some other children with a low muscle tone drooling and having. He had feeding issues as far as, because of the tongue being weak and the lips being weak, it was hard for him to not so much eat the food, but swallow it and chew it and things like that, because they were so low in the weakness area. So therefore, he had to have occupational therapy at home, as well as speech therapy, to strengthen those muscles and exercises in the mouth and the tongue and things like that.
And his diagnosis was at what age?
2.
2.
So, and you know, the other thing to realize when you have a child with apraxia, because you have the deficit, if you want to call it that, in articulation, there's also a lot of problems with friends, communication. That's extremely important, because the child is very frustrated. They can't communicate well, or they're nonverbal. So trying to get play dates and friendships is very hard, even when you're in special services, because you're taken away sometimes out of the crowd, so to speak. And so the child wants to communicate or wants to play with other people, but trying to communicate is very hard. You don't have the articulation.